Have you ever been hated for something that was never your fault? I was only 17 when my parents were murdered before my eyes. That same night, 3 cruel men stole my innocence, leaving me with a child the entire village would later call a curse. They mocked me, rejected me, and said no respectable man would ever love me. Yet years later, the very people who laughed at me watched a millionaire choose me over the woman he was supposed to marry. But before that miracle happened, I had to survive hell. My name is Oluchi Nweso, and I grew up in a quiet village in eastern Nigeria. Before tragedy found us, we were poor but happy. My father worked tirelessly on our small farm, while my mother sold vegetables in the local market. They dreamed that I would become the first nurse in our family. Every evening we ate together, laughed together, and believed tomorrow would always be better. Looking back now, those simple moments became the greatest treasures I would ever lose. Everything changed on one rainy night. I was studying for my final examinations when loud banging shook our front door. Before my father could react, armed robbers forced their way inside our home. They demanded money we didn't have. My father begged them to spare us, but one gunshot silenced him forever. My mother's desperate screams filled the room as she tried to protect me, but another shot ended her life too. In just a few terrible moments, I became an orphan. Terrified, I ran barefoot into the darkness, praying only to survive. The rain soaked my clothes as I stumbled along the lonely village road. I thought I had escaped the nightmare, but fate had something even crueler waiting for me. 3 drunken men blocked my path. I begged them to let me go and told them my parents had just been killed. Instead of showing mercy, they laughed. That night, they stole the last piece of innocence I had left and disappeared into the darkness. Weeks later, I discovered I was pregnant. The news spread through the village faster than wildfire. Neighbors whispered whenever I walked by, calling me cursed and shameless. Some even told me to get rid of the baby because he would only remind me of my pain. Broken and ashamed, I locked myself inside our tiny house, convinced that my life was over. But my grandmother sat beside me, held my trembling hands, and said words that changed my heart forever. "Evil men caused your suffering," she whispered. "But this child is innocent. Don't punish a life that God has placed in your hands." Months later, my son Bobo was born. The moment he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, I stopped seeing him as a reminder of my past. He became my reason to keep living. I worked on farms, sold pure water under the burning sun, and cared for my bedridden mother every single day. I never imagined that one ordinary morning at the village market, a single collision with a stranger would change our lives forever. The next morning I woke before sunrise just as I always did. I kissed Bobo on the forehead, left him with my grandmother, and carried a heavy bag of pure water to the busy village market. The scorching sun had barely risen, yet my feet already ached from walking. Every bottle I sold meant another meal for my family, or another dose of medicine for my sick mother. No matter how exhausted I felt, I couldn't afford to stop. Too many people depended on me as I walked through the crowded market calling out, "Pure water! Cold pure water!" I accidentally bumped into a tall man dressed in an elegant navy blue suit. The bag slipped from my hands, and dozens of water sachets scattered across the dusty ground. Before I could apologize, several women nearby burst into laughter. They pointed at me and began whispering about my past, saying I was the village girl who had a child without a husband. Embarrassed, I knelt to gather the scattered water, wishing I could disappear. But before anyone could insult me again, the stranger spoke with a calm yet commanding voice. "That's enough," he said firmly. The market fell silent. He looked at the women with disappointment. "You know nothing about this woman's pain, yet you judge her as if you've never made a mistake. Kindness costs nothing, but cruelty can destroy a person's life." No one dared answer him. The man bent down and helped me collect every sachet of water. I thanked him quietly, unable to meet his eyes. He smiled warmly and introduced himself. "My name is Kenneth Ezeka." I recognized the name immediately. Everyone in the village knew about Kenneth, the successful real estate developer who had built a fortune in Lagos but never forgot where he came from. Unlike many wealthy people, there wasn't a trace of pride in the way he spoke to me. Later that afternoon, Kenneth visited his mother's house. During dinner, he couldn't stop thinking about the young woman from the market. Curious, he asked, "Mother, who is Oluchi Nweso?" Neka sighed deeply before telling him everything. How Oluchi had lost her parents, how she had been attacked while fleeing for her life, and how she had raised little Boba with dignity despite endless poverty and cruel gossip. Kenneth listened in silence, his heart growing heavier with every word. The following morning, someone knocked gently on our small wooden door. I opened it in frozen surprise. Standing outside was Kenneth, carrying a basket of food and medicine. He greeted my grandmother respectfully before looking at me with sincere eyes. "Oluchi," he said softly, "I've come because I believe you deserve a better life. I have a job for you in Lagos. If you're willing to trust me." My heart pounded as I stared at him, wondering if this unexpected offer was the answer to my prayers, or the beginning of another painful chapter. After praying with my grandmother and mother, I accepted Kenneth's offer. 2 days later, I packed my few clothes into a small travel bag, carried Boba in my arms, and boarded a bus to Lagos. I had never traveled so far from home before. As the village disappeared behind us, tears filled my eyes. I wasn't crying because I was afraid of the future. I was crying because for the first time in years, I dared to believe that God might finally be opening a new door for us. When we arrived at Kenneth's mansion, I could hardly believe my eyes. The house looked more like a palace than a home. Marble floors sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, and luxury cars filled the driveway. Kenneth smiled as he welcomed us inside. "From today," he said, "this is your home too." Before showing me my room, he introduced me to the household staff and explained my duties. He also reassured me that Boba would always stay with me and that my mother's treatment had already begun. Just as I started to feel relieved, the sound of high heels echoed through the grand hallway. A beautiful woman dressed in an expensive red designer gown walked toward us with a cold expression. She looked me up and down before turning to Kenneth. "Who is she?" she asked. "This is Oluchi," Kenneth replied calmly. "She'll be working here." The woman laughed mockingly. "A village maid? And she's bringing her child into this house." Her words stung, but I remained silent. Kenneth's expression changed immediately. "Her name is Oluchi," he said firmly. "You'll address her with respect." The woman folded her arms. "I'm Mandy, Kenneth's fiancée," she replied, staring directly at me. "Learn your place and don't forget why you're here." Without another word, she turned and walked away. I lowered my head, already realizing that working in this mansion would not be as easy as I had hoped. Something about Mandy's eyes told me she already hated me. The next morning, I woke before everyone else and cleaned every room exactly as Mrs. Grace, the head housekeeper, had instructed. I scrubbed the marble floors until they shined, prepared breakfast with the kitchen staff, and made sure every corner of the mansion was spotless. Just as I finished, Mandy walked in, looked around and frowned. "Do it again," she ordered. "I can still see dust." I looked carefully but saw none. Even so, I quietly picked up the mop and started over. Over the next few days, Mandy's cruelty only grew worse. She made me wash already clean dishes, iron clothes that had no wrinkles, and clean the same floors again and again. One afternoon, Boba ran toward me with a smile after waking from his nap. Mandy stepped back in disgust and said, "Keep that child away from me. He smells like poverty." My heart broke, but before I could respond, another voice echoed through the room. "That's enough, Mandy." Kenneth had heard every single word. Kenneth walked into the living room with a disappointed look on his face. "Mandy, that's enough," he said firmly. "Oluchi works harder than anyone in this house, and she deserves respect." Mandy rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "You're defending a maid over your own fiancé?" she asked angrily. Kenneth remained calm. "I'm defending someone who's being treated unfairly." For the first time in years, someone had stood up for me without expecting anything in return. From that day on, Kenneth paid closer attention to my life. Whenever he returned from work, he would ask Mrs. Grace if Boba had eaten well or if I had managed to rest. One evening, he brought home a small toy car and a storybook for Boba. My little boy hugged the gifts tightly and smiled brighter than I had seen in months. Watching Boba laugh filled my heart with gratitude, and I silently thanked God for sending kindness into our lives after so many years of pain. Kenneth drove back to our village and found me exactly where we had first met, selling pure water beneath the burning afternoon sun. I looked up in shock as he walked toward me. Before I could speak, he took my hands and said, Oluchi, I don't care what the world says. I don't care about gossip, money, or reputation. I only know that life has no meaning without you and Boba. At that moment, little Boba smiled, reached for Kenneth and softly whispered, Dada. Tears filled Kenneth's eyes as he lifted Boba into his arms. Weeks later, he returned to our village with his mother and family to perform the traditional marriage rites. My sick mother received the medical care she needed, and my grandmother thanked God for answering years of prayers. As the whole village watched, Kenneth knelt before me with a beautiful ring. Oluchi Nweso, he said. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? Through happy tears I whispered, yes. The woman they once called a disgrace became the respected wife of the man who saw her true worth, proving that kindness and love will always shine brighter than pride and wealth.